imagine what a breakthrough feels like. I mean, boy, this is a scary picture, isn't it? What a depressing life. Like, you're doing this thing, this is the dream of your life, and you're sort of in line. So what does a breakthrough feel like? You know, what does it feel like? So here we're going to talk about challenges to early tech firms, how to do go-to-market discovery, how other people did it. So generally, I'm a believer in simplicity. I kind of think there's two legs of this. One is about the product, one is about the growth architecture. And that's pretty much it. There's a lot of other factors we can talk about. This question, of course, I can't tell you the number of times in Europe, especially the last couple of years, where I start seeing the same applications, in two different countries, and you're like, oh boy. And both companies are super strong in their local market, but they have not necessarily figured out how they're differentiated in that other European market, let alone in that other international market. In growth architecture, how do you engage a niche effectively, cost effectively, frictionless? So there's these different moments in your life cycle of growth. You kind of get your initial customers and your feedback, and you kind of plateau. You're really building out that product roadmap. The earlier you can bring the feedback for your product in terms of the international competitive landscape and mindset of the executives, I think the better, because as a former product guy, I know I only have a finite amount of resources with my engineering team. And if I give them a list of 100 things to build and 30 of them are not contributing to that global sale as a global architecture, then I want to know that. And I want to know what 30 features are going to be in that list of 100 that will give me that global architecture. From a sales and growth perspective, until you really understand how to share unique usable insights with your prospect, not just telling them the thing they heard from the last 5 vendors to come through their door, and get that pre-located or get that in front of the executive, the harder it's going to be. And generally what you want to try to avoid is that fatal pinch, where you've overextended yourself, you've hired your team, but the revenue growth is still only 5 or 10%, and you're seeing that you're going to run out of cash. So doing these things before you hire armies and you get your unit of economics correct with your growth process, and also are clear about your North Star, are important. Generally, we believe in building a small team of people. Usually it's comprised of between 1 and 3 people. Clarifying some questions that you're going to be asking into that foreign market, identifying target companies, and spending a couple, 3 months doing this discovery. You're unpacking things. Sometimes I've had people say, oh, we already knew that. After we get through that process, we say, oh, it's okay if you already knew that. We're validating it. And it's good that it's true, because it means you don't have to change much. And sometimes you'll discover other things. So you repack, and then you go into your scale mode. The examples we have here, I've already talked about several of them, but in the case of, so I talked about the QGO example, that was the NLP company. First, they tested in the market. Then they landed some clients while they were still remote. They didn't put any bodies in the country. They landed 2 clients. Then they actually exited. That wasn't on purpose. That wasn't what they'd intended. And I didn't like it, actually, because I was there as a team member, and I was going to be comped on the bonuses for all these great clients we had in the funnel. But then we got acquired, and that was great for the founders. And then the executive team actually moved to the US after the exit. Okay, so there was kind of a, these things can happen in lots of different orders. We had another example, well, 8XTPL, where they tested the market. And I told you there was that CEO parallel track where the CEO was running around doing exactly what we were doing, but with his network. And then they opened a US office. They're a public company. Surprisingly, they're on the Polish Stock Exchange. You guys know how that game works. So it's a little struggle, actually, because they, the early stage company on the stock market. But they saw their valuation boost around this time by about 50 million. I think it was zloty. I'm not sure if it was euros or zloty. anyway, huge boost after a couple of years of being flat. There was something going on that happened during that period where they got that value growth. Adyen went from testing to directly to a partner strategy. They landed the partner. They landed the partner, then they landed a client through the partner, Verizon. Then the CEO and the pre-sales team moved over there, and then they exited to a German industrial company. So again, it created some jealousy back in the home country, and they got bought. So you see, there's a whole range of different ways it happened. Hippo, they sold Disney. I told you already, they sold Disney through their downloadable free stuff. They tested the market with those while they had those new clients. Then they hired into the country, then they exited. So there's lots of different ways of doing it. The ways I've seen it failed. One company, they started the testing, they built up their funnel, and then they stopped. They paused. They had a funnel that they were building. They left a lot of things that were on the table with that funnel. So just in terms of how you squeeze things, another one that tested, they got nervous that they didn't have the right information and it wasn't validating things how they thought about it. And they began to sort of question the process, and they just kind of went off sideways, and it just, people lost confidence in doing things. So I'll share the deck later. This will drill down exactly into what types of activities are in that unpacking mode, in that repacking mode, and then that scale mode. But in a nutshell, you've got your virtual team. You're doing a quick online assessment. So you're seeing how is the website, the LinkedIn, the various aspects of the business perceived by a non-company person, so an outsider like us, or we'll talk to some people and have them review those. You're building out your target lists and your personas. What are the key discovery questions that you need to have answered? And you're picking 10 friendly targets, people that are in exactly the roles that you're looking for in the right companies. I'm a believer in using affinity networks. This is a good way of collecting information in a way that's trusted, as someone who will tell you what they really think. Then you can use that with some cold outreach examples. You end up validating what your unique usable insights are, so that when you're presenting your information to an executive, they're not falling asleep and thinking, oh, I've seen this 10 times before. You're bringing those unique insights that you have already, but you have to really identify them. And in some cases, you're actually validating which use cases to focus on. You know, that's a little bit not as common, because by the time you've gotten to where you guys are now, you kind of know what you do. But there may be some cases where you need to decide to simplify things. And then finally, this idea of outlining the video script, which is a simple thing in what it sounds like, but it takes 4 to 6 weeks of writing and rewriting and writing and rewriting. But that becomes the basis of all. Yeah.
In terms of product architecture, you put some particular product features of market that value that marketing should focus just about on just on.
Okay, yeah, good question. So let me just forward here a little bit. So I think when it comes to the inbound versus outbound question, yeah, I don't know, this will answer your question directly. I tend to think that there's no other way, if you're internationalizing, than doing outbound first in a conscious way, where you're explicitly looking for nuggets of insight into how you're perceived. So for example, if I do inbound, but I've never looked at the eyes of my buyer, and I've sort of drilled 2 levels deeper into what they're thinking when they're listening to my presentation, then I'm going to miss the barriers, the friction. I'm going to miss the questions that pop in their head, and I won't be able to explain what I do correctly. because it'll require an additional meeting for someone to physically explain and answer that question for the executive. So I believe that both for hardware and for software, that outbound always needs to come first. And it always needs to be done in a way where you are explicitly gathering those obstacles in the heads of your buyer, and then you're baking them into your inbound process. So, I mean, inbound historically worked because the market wasn't as competitive. And both from a product point of view and also from an inbound technique point of view. But that's over. You know, the Poland was really good at inbound. I think Poland was one of the best at inbound, 10 years ago, and really leveraged it. But the problem is everybody learned pattern. It's not a long-term pattern. You have to insert yourself in there first and do but you maybe respond to what I'm saying so I can see whether we're getting to a common view or not. What do you think about what I'm saying? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I'm a big believer that inbound is massively the way to be, but you've got to go through the pain first of a very focused discovery process where you understand not just how to present your product, but you understand how to explain to the executive three things. I mean, why is what you're doing important to them? Because some executives don't know, especially the business guys. You know, the CTO and the R&D guy, they may know exactly. You just say a word and they know. You know, ASIC or whatever, ASIC or some of the terms in semiconductor that I read on your website, Pavel. So answering the question why, 50% of the business executives need that. Answering the question what, like what the heck is this thing? What's the terminology? What's the way of thinking? What's the framework? That's another 30% need to know what is it. Now, once you've got those 80% tackled, there's 20% or 10% out there that know how to do it. They're like, they know why and what, and they're trying to figure out how. But those are the three things that need to be really clear. And until you've done outbound to discover the nuances of those things, you can't do inbound really well. That's how I see it. But inbound in the end is the goal, because it's massively successful if you've got the whole thing dialed in. So I'm going to skip around a little bit here. So we have some, and again, I'll provide this later, but we're, I think I got through most of this stuff. Yeah. So I'm, so imagine what a successful growth strategy looks like.